Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for February of 2021. This month we got 9 albums to check out, so a little more than last month, but still not quite a beefy, stacked log update this month. March seemingly has a lot more lined up. There's a couple things I've already kind of missed, but yeah, mostly just the stuff that piqued my curiosity and piqued some of your curiosity in the comments of last month as well. So let's go ahead and get to talking. This new Foo Fighters album is something of an oddity because for the first time in their career, I was really uneasy of the first following the lead single of this record, Shame Shame, which is different because even though their last 2 records were super underwhelming and tepid, they at least had a great first step forward. And I thought, well, maybe this will be the first project in their career where I just won't like anything on it, because Shame Shame just is a shitty song and a really bad lead single in hindsight, because the record itself, nothing like Shame Shame. Sure, it has a more groove-centric nature, but the groove and minimalism seen on Shame Shame is not representative of the rest of the project. However, I don't think Medicine at Midnight is all that much of a step up from the rest of the project. Sure, I don't mind the boogie-centric style that a lot of this record carries. You know, tracks like Making a Fire and No Son of Mine and Making Poison, or even the track Cloud Spotter, I could see being played at some bar somewhere, which kind of taps into the sort of van tour aesthetic they were wanting to go to following this, what would have been this album's initial release. And some of those tracks are easily the best on the record. Hell, the opener, Making a Fire, still sets the sort of standard that the Foo Fighters had, that record-wise is step forth on a great foot. And Cloud Spotter is easily the best track on the record. But even some of the songs I mentioned, that boogie style just sort of runs itself thin by the end of the project, you know. And I will say, is a little too derivative at points. The opener, Making a Fire, for as great as it is, it's pretty much just alive and amplified by the Mooney Suzuki. And the points where they sort of dip away from that and go into more Foo Fighters leaning territories, like on the track Waiting on a War, or the softer moment Chasing Birds, or the closer Love Dies Young, it doesn't lead to anything dazzling. Those moments that feel more like Foo Fighters moments are even more underwhelming than those boogie rock cuts. And those rock cuts make this album a much more consistent experience because tonally they're really doubling down on this aesthetic. But because nothing reaches the highs that like Feast of the Famine or Something from Nothing, or, you know, to run for the previous record they did, Sky's a Neighborhood, or Run, you know, this record doesn't have any tracks like that really truly stand that much higher above anything else on the project. You know, it's all right. This isn't a bad record by any stretch of the imagination, but it's very average. It's one of the more normal slices of their discography. And even though they're going forth on this datified rock adventure, it feels like the safest place for their sound to sit, because it's nothing bold. They're not doing anything, you know, genre pushing. You know, they're doing something stylistically pushing for them, but it's into a realm that just sees them aging themselves even farther in a way that I don't think suits them all that well personally. You know, like I said, the moments that shine are still kind of bright, but they're covered in this sheen of mediocrity, the mediocrity that the band, even at their lowest, seemingly stands above on its brightest moments. So I was conflicted at where to score this record. You know, I will say that because they don't do anything criminally boring or outright awful, I can't give this a negative score, but I don't want to give it super glowing praise either. So I'm sitting with it. It exists in this realm where it hits some notes, but the more that I revisit this thing, the more I just am smacked with this bland taste that gives me nothing of super interest to keep spinning outside of the highlights that I enjoyed. This is one of the records that was on my anticipated of the year list. John Carpenter's third batch of Lost theme tracks see him continuing the eerie vibes that coded the first Lost themes and parts of the second, but bringing some of that boisterous rock edge that coded the second Lost themes into a harmonious marriage that I think works incredibly well. You know, that you still have a lot of the moody, atmospheric, you know, synthetic driving or atmospheres like on the opener after Alive After Death, which has this sort of riff that just keeps looping and creating tone, or tracks like Dripping Blood and Dead Eyes, which continue to have this cold analog synth tone that creates this just, again, very eerie, spookified atmosphere that works incredibly well. It's something John's been crafting throughout his tenure as a film scorer, and again, he toyed with on the first couple of Lost Themes record, and I'm always happy to, always love to see it here. But the tracks where he infuses that with a lot more kineticism, or in the case of tracks like Cemetery and Vampire's Touch, adds this bombast, almost 80s rock edge that coded the second Lost themes, but does it even more gracefully than that project. And I think it's because he's infusing it with those eerie textures that I really love to hear from John Carpenter's work. You know, this is all around a record that I love so incredibly so, and I feel like as the year goes on, especially around the spooky times, I will see myself throwing this back on rotation. But I do think that it was a nice thing to have in the beginning of my year at a time where I'm still kind of looking for things to love. I'm glad that I found this early on, and I hope to hold on to it throughout the rest of the year, because I really love John Carpenter's work. A lot of the synth tones on here are in the same vein of what I really enjoy from him, from his Escape from New York stuff, his Halloween stuff. You know, it has that same analog 70s sheen, but in a very vibrant, modern style. Similarly to what he did on the Halloween sequel that he did in 2018, a lot of that same texturing is done on this project, and I think it still comes across incredibly well. There's a real sense of depth to a lot of the low end here. You know, the high end is really shimmery as well. How the evolution on the closer Carpathian Darkness kind of runs the whole gambit of what the album has given you so far, and sort of cements a lot of the thematics that the record has going on to it sonically incredibly well. This feels like more so a soundtrack than anything else he's done with these Lost themes, and it feels like his way of providing almost like a Castlevania soundtrack for an audience. You know, I seriously get a lot of Castlevania vibes from this thing, more so than any other thing he's done in the past. And you guys know me, you know I love Castlevania, so I'm perfectly okay with that. And like I said, I'm loving this thing a hell of a lot. I think it's easily as good as the first Lost themes, and definitely better than the second for how it fuses the sonic elements of both into one. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. I feel like if you really enjoy good horror synth or good progressive electronic, you'll enjoy this thing a hell of a lot. And if you love the ambient atmospheres that coded that John Carpenter project, let me divert you incredibly, surprisingly, to Loathe's new record. Loathe was a band whose record that came out last year, whose melding of heavier metal with shoegaze elements a la Deftones I really enjoyed, completely surprised me and a lot of the scene by dropping an ambient record this year in the form of The Things They Believe, a record that sees them really doubling down on this ambient-driven atmosphere, but pulls it off incredibly well. It's a record that doesn't overstay its runtime, while having lots of smaller songs in the beginning. They build to some meaningful moments, like on tracks like on tracks like Love in Real Time, which features some beautiful saxophone work that creep in on there, and on The Close of the Rain Outside, some really grand crescendos that happen, like on the fast build of Black Marble, or the huge grandiosity seen in Keep Fighting the Good Fight. This is a record that is very calm, but has parts of foreboding tones within that calm ambience that I felt like kept me coming back to it. You know, also the fact that it was just a genuine surprise at how well a band that does the styling seen on their last record, and for an ambient project to really have these sort of sonic components going on, I feel like it almost pulls it off better than some elements of the last Nine Inch Nails Ghost project was trying to do with its darker ambient twists. You know, while it's not quite as completely holistically produced. I still enjoy a lot of the more lower fine leaning textures on here, and I think that, again, the moments where it all comes together, whether in a beautiful swell or again just some instrumentation that creeps in the background and comes to the forefront, it creates this incredibly fulfilling experience for the listener. And again, if you like some really calm, you know, sort of ambient stuff to have sit in your mind in a sort of meditative state, I'd recommend this project, surprisingly enough. I think that it's incredibly well constructed, and I'm kind of shocked, but I also want more, because I think it's very good, and I actually like it more than their last album. You know, I think that this is a great direction for them to experiment with, and while I'd like to see them experiment in other ventures, if they want to do more of this, I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10 as well. And similarly to Loathe, Hayley Williams also dropped a surprise, more lower key driven record following up her pop solo debut, Petals for Armor, a more acoustically driven record, Flowers for Vases, Descansos, which sees her doing the whole DIY at home record experience and creating this sort of tangential project to Petals for Armor. It's still very filled with intimate deconstructions of relationships and stuff like that, in a way that I feel like songwriting wise, the intimacy works incredibly well. However, I don't think that it's as compelling of a listening experience as Petals for Armor was, and I feel like the crutch of this record lies in that presentation style. I like a lot of the writing on here, honestly. I feel like the allegories, the metaphors on tracks like Asystole and First Thing to Go, and even some of the imagery within Over Those Hills or on HYD are beautiful, well constructed, really well written stuff. And even the instrumentation on those tracks, you know, the minimalism on Asystole works incredibly well. I like the drum production on tracks where it's here, like on the closer Just a Lover, or on the track My Limb, which has one of the closest sounds to, at least vocally, to how she sounded on Petals for Armor, but it's still a little bit more of a tangential experience to that, even in that instance. But I feel like this record doesn't have enough sonically to carry the listener through the experience consistently. It's an interesting first listen, because you kind of get this experience, this sort of back and forth of this really intimate feeling stuff to these more, you know, flourished out moments to these more minimally driven but still grand moments. But by the time the second half of the record starts, it's a lot more minimally driven, and on subsequent listens, that minimal back half really starts to just sit into this realm of, alright, I'm waiting for Just a Lover to kick in so I can get some more of those drums in here. And that's not incredible slack to Hayley, because I feel like her voice carries a lot of it in a really good way. She lets her vocals shine in a way that I feel like even Petals for Armor didn't fully let her do, nor does the stuff that she does with Paramore fully let her do. But I wish that there was more sonically going on to drive the record, ultimately, at the end of the day. You know, even the title, one of the title tracks, Descansos, the instrumental cut is beautiful and really well put together, but there's just not enough of that, or not enough of that in tandem with more, again, vibrant stuff to keep the track listing a little more compelling. You know, I feel like this would have almost served as more injections to create an even more dynamic experience with Petals for Armor, a record that, while having these pop-driven elements, honestly would have benefited from some more intimate feeling tracks like what's on here to help give even more dynamics across the project. You know, I think that this record is fine, but its biggest crux, I should say, is that approach and how it kneecaps the back half of this experience. It's still, again, a well-written project. You can really feel her working through her problems on here, and I appreciate that. I really do. But it is just not nearly as consistent of an experience as Petals for Armor was. And so I'm giving this a very average score. I'm giving it a 5 because it could be so much better if it had a little more in the middle to back half to just zhuzh it up just a little bit. I've seen people make comparisons to Folklore, and I feel like what Folklore does that this doesn't is it does have a much more dynamic listening experience. And it could have been because Taylor also had other people in the studio with her, and this was purely Hayley doing Hayley. But I feel like records like Folklore and Evermore benefit from some kinetic-driven stuff, or some stuff to just change up the style, change up the pace in a way that this record just didn't do completely. My girl, Miho Hatori, one half of the creative force behind one of my favorite underrated bands, Chibo Mato, her second solo record, and her first since Chibo Mato's second split back in 2017, titled Between Isekai and Slice of Life, came out, which was a surprise to me, because I didn't know it was coming, but I enjoy a lot of what's here. You know, while it doesn't necessarily have a lot of the same sonic ideas that she may pull together with Yuka Honda, in Chibo Mato, she does still present a sound that still feels intrinsically herself, in a really gratifying way. You know, there's a lot of really soft, poppy grooves that code a lot of this thing, like the opener, Tokyo Story, or the tracks Desire and My Phone, or I Told Ya, which see her really just, again, tapping into that almost vintage groove style, very vintage electronic driven. But I really enjoy it. It's got a really laid back vibe that I think works incredibly well. And she also injects some more just calm pop driven moments like Formula X or Bone Air, while adding a bit of bite and aggression, or just some general, a little more attitude, like on Don't Be Cheap, that kind of lies more into the lanes of what she may have pulled together with like a Chibo Mato, as far as like a little more hip-hop centric. She's not singing as much on those tracks, while also creating some more dynamically constructed tracks like 19-Year-Old Me. But while I like attributes of this record, and I really love the overall sonic palette of this, and I feel like the moments where she gets really catchy or pins together a good melody, like on Formula X or I Told Ya, or pulls together a nice dynamic dense groove like on Bone Air, there's some elements that go on for just a little bit too long, or I kind of wish were evolved a little more across its lengthier runtime, like on the opener Tokyo Story. For as much as I love the groove of that song's core, it could have easily stopped like a minute or so earlier. Same with 19-Year-Old Me. While I enjoy that song, it's one of the longest tracks on the record, and it doesn't go anywhere all that dynamic across its runtime. You know, I can see what she's going for, but I don't think it quite fully is realized on that track. But I still enjoy each song at its core, and I think that this is a very solid listening experience. I kind of wish there was a little more bite, a little more aggression, or a little more tongue-in-cheekness from Miho, like on Don't Be Cheap or on Bone Air. I really like the sort of punchy, noisier attributes of that track, and I kind of wish they came across more in the record, or popped up more in the record. But I don't mind that she's sitting in this more calm realm, this more vibey, you know, again, kinetically driven at points, but overall just pretty atmosphere that her voice sits in incredibly well. While I don't want to say I miss Yuka Honda, because this, again, still feels very Miho Hatori, I do wish that she did a little more with some of the sonic palette here. And while I miss Chibo Mato, I don't necessarily hate this direction that she's deciding to go in. I still think this is a solid listening experience. If you enjoy Chibo Mato and you want to support Miho Hatori, or if you like her stuff and like some of the other creative ventures that she's done in the past, you might enjoy aspects of this like I did. And I think this is a very solid ass experience, and I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. So this guy, when Anthony was promoting, or letting people promote themselves as a reviewer on Twitter. I did as well, because, you know, your boy's got to put his grind in somewhere. And this guy, Conor, found my tweet, hit me up, asked me to review his album that dropped this year, In the Shadow of, and he is this lo-fi rapper. You know, he likes him some vibes, I can tell by a lot of the production on here. It's very smooth. It sits in or at least in a realm that I could see very New Japanese adjacent, which is perfectly fine. You guys know, as a rapper, I also sit in that realm myself. I like that calm, as far as a writer, I like sitting in that calm stream of consciousness realm at points myself. Especially the bitch is stuck in echo chamber mezzanines. And there's even some points where he morphs out of that lo-fi mold as far as like not just a stream of consciousness rapper, but he adds a little bit of kineticism, or he has a little bit of kineticism in some stuff like Indian Poker, or he more lays into that singer, you know, style that lies with an emo alt rap like on Sunbather or on Fortune Cookies, and he delves more into his own philosophies of life and reflection, something that again is not too dissimilar from some of the stuff that I write. My mind stalls as I slip into a coma of abstract energy. And I enjoy that stuff. I enjoy that aspect of this project. I think this guy, he's got a really smooth flow. You know, he really knows how to work himself onto a beat incredibly well.
For the most part, anyway.
My issues more lie in the production side of things. You know, I think that this project, as far as a hip-hop record goes, it's pretty solid. I liked some of the hooks, like on Fortune Cookies. I like how it spun really well into the concept of the song. I liked his flow on Pascal as well. I thought that was really tight. And I dig some of the collaborations that come in here as well. I think Aerospace on the opener works incredibly well. But the production across the board is relatively inconsistent. At some points, the vocals sit incredibly high in the mix to almost an intrusive degree. And this is a DIY hip-hop project, so I can't knock it too hard for that. But I feel like at some points, it's a little distracting.
And I feel like some of the production has similar faults, like on the opener. The guitars on that track are just like, it's a little distracting at points.
You know, to a point where I get that it's there's a point where you're tapping into a vibe, but there's a point where you transcend that vibe. Because there's some points where it works incredibly well, like some of the tracks I mentioned, like Pascal. I love the production on Sunbreaker, and I think, again, on Indian Poker, you fit that beat incredibly well. And I'm speaking directly to Conor, because he requested it, and he's probably going to watch this as a critical review of the record. I don't know. But I dug it. I thought this was a solid-ass record. You know, I feel like if you like lo-fi, you know, vibes, if you like lo-fi beats, if you like introspective bars about life, about the meaning of it, about, you know, someone's perspective in their own life, you'll enjoy aspects of this record. You know,
if you like the low-key tracks from dudes like Open Mike Eagle, or you dig dudes like Milo, you may dig some of the vibes that this dude's putting out, honestly.
This was solid. Thanks for the request, man. I dug this. I'll be checking out for more of your stuff in the future. If you ever got some tracks you want to send my way, you know my DMs. Yeah. If I were to give this a score, I don't know. I want to give it like, I'm feeling like a 6, mostly because of the production thing. Tweak that up, spin some more hooks in there. You could get like a beefier score in there, man, for sure. I think you got some potential. I dug this.
Massage for the push shot, only bad things on the roster. I shot caffeine.
British grime rapper Slowthai, following up his explosive debut, Nothing Great About Britain, which I loved, a lot of the internet really loved, with Tyron, a record that sees him reflecting on his life post-success on both sides of the coin. You know, and this record is actually paced in a way that I feel like could be a hard thing to sell to people. You know, you've got this banger-centric front half that's a lot more low-key in its second half, you know, and that can easily, especially given how angry and charismatic he came across on that debut, that can be a big risk, but I feel like the reward is incredible on Tyron. I like this record a lot. You know, I like that he deconstructs and takes a look at things like cancel culture and social media in a very aggressive sort of way, like on Cancelled, which has a great feature from Skepta, or What, which does something very similar, while also playing up that sort of devilish side to his personality that was seen on Cancelled, like on Maza or on 45 Smoke. Maza, or even Play With Fire, which transitions into the second half of the record incredibly well. You know, he talks about being, you know, this dude who wants to live his life to the fullest, but there is another side of that coin, and I like how the second side of that record really talks about or plays up that attributes, the reflections to that lavishness, you know, sort of the Danny Brown half is the first half, where he's just going into excess, like Maza being grime slang for excess, you know, living it up excessively. And I like how it's handled incredibly well on that track, but I also love how, you know, tracks like I Tried talk about that so upfrontly, or even in tracks like Terms or Feel Away tap into the more melancholic aspect of that, and I feel like those tracks in particular help boost the second half of the record with some incredible highlights that showcase Slowthai in a full personality sense. I love this record. I love a lot of the production. I think the bangers bang and the smoothness in the second half is so creamy without losing some of that modern edge that coded a lot in Nothing Great About Britain and made that a phenomenal release as well. I think the features are really good. I already talked about Skepta and A$AP Rock, or A$AP Rocky, but I also love Dominic Fike and Denzel Curry on their track. I love James Blake on the track that he's on. I feel like the whole second half of the record is just as well constructed as the first, and in some instances, I actually like a little more, because I don't mind him getting real aggressive and into it, but some of the tracks I just don't like the flow on or the construction of as a whole, and I feel like the second half almost boosts up that first half, or it makes up for some of those faults in the first half, you know? This record is a full package, which is what I was hoping for from Slowthai following the full package that was Nothing Great About Britain. And I feel like this goes toe-to-toe with it in a very positive way. You know, I like that he's not just trying to backpedal. I like that he's not trying to be anything but himself, unabashedly, across this whole project. And I got a lot of love and respect for that. And his pen game is really good. I like his flow. I think he's a really dynamic rapper. I like his aggressive side. I think that he also just coats himself on each instrumental perfectly. I think this is a great record. You know, I think that it's very much worth your time. If you like Nothing Great About Britain, you'll enjoy this as well. Or if you hadn't checked out Nothing Great About Britain and you want a really good grime hip-hop record to check out, listen to Tyron. It's a full package, my dudes. It's an 8 out of 10 experience for sure. You know, when looking at the album cover for the new Pale Waves record, I was hoping it wouldn't be as on the nose stylistically as it may have seemed, but man, is this just a 2000s alt-pop project. And that's not inherently a bad thing, but it's a little too on the nose. You know, for as on the nose as the album art for their last record was at saying, hey, we kind of like the 1975 and we're going to bite off that tip a little bit thanks to Matty Healy producing it. This record shows, hey, we kind of like 2000s pop rock a la Avril Lavigne and we're going to bite off that tip just a little bit. And I think that vintage production actually sounds nice here. Like, it's weird. It definitely sounds like it's straight out of 2001, 2002. But part of me doesn't mind that. I think that it's a nice sounding project. It's very much influenced by the Matrix's production style. The same group that did Avril Lavigne and Liz Phair in the 2000s. It has that same sheen. But it lets the hooks that are on here pop in the same way that the hooks on their first album did. You know, the choruses on Change and You Don't Own Me and the title track, or You Don't Own Me, and the title track pop in the way that I would expect them to with this production. Some of them don't work as well, like on She's My Religion or Easy, or even Odd Ones Out, a track that I think is the most 2000s Avril Lavigne to almost a derivative aspect to the same thing those Pale Waves or those 1975's fans that hated the derivativeness of that project. I'm feeling those same vibes with this in some of those tracks, but I don't think it's bad. I think it's very dated, but in a way that I'm okay with. I've talked about before about timeless slices of time, and had this been released in 2001, 2002, this would be that. Because a lot of the songwriting still pops in ways that I enjoy. While I think, again, it's a little rough, not just the hook on She's My Religion, but a lot of the writing on that track, yeah, it's not the best way to convey that sort of thing. I dig the message, but it kind of is a spotty landing. But I like the writing on Odd Ones Out a lot. I love the bite on You Don't Own Me. I think that's a good sort of power-driven anthem, if I've ever heard one. And some of the intimacy on Wish You Were Here, I think, comes across incredibly well as well. But while I like the production, I can't knock that it is incredibly derivative in a way that I wasn't hoping for it to be. But it doesn't slam the record as badly as you may think.
And I know somebody in the comments probably, if you find this, is going to say, but you slammed MGK for the exact same thing last year. However, I feel like a couple things play to this record's strengths that MGK's did not. And I apologize for the rest of this listening log update being done webcam style. My camera battery is dead, and I tried to charge it for a little bit, but it still needs some more juice, and I want to get this review up at a relatively decent time before next week's content rolls out, so we're going to get this finished up webcam style. But Pale Waves, and I think it helps that they're younger, feel more like they're trying to tap into, again, a vibe that they're just feeling. And while MGK tapping into a pop-punk vibe may seem like where he genuinely wants to go, because of the narrative around it, it feels so disingenuous, especially given how upfront he felt like he was trying to play into that with the title of the record and the overall lackluster delivery by himself, as a vocalist. I feel like the vocals on here pop a lot better than the vocals on MGK's Tickets to My Downfall. I feel like the songwriting, because it sounds so innocent and from the mind of a teenager, it plays better to the strengths on here than it did on Tickets to My Downfall, which sounded more just like a guy who's trying to sort of do what a lot of older guys in pop-punk bands do, and that's reflect on your youth in a way that makes you feel old. I like it. I like the writing on Pale Waves more for what it tries to do. The innocence or the trying to tap into adolescence that MGK did just fell so flat for me in a way that Pale Waves did not quite do as much. It's still not a great record. I still don't love this thing whole stop, but I think it's a solid enough experience. And if you want a nicer dose of 2000s nostalgia than what MGK gave you on Tickets to My Downfall, I feel like you'll like Who Am I just a bit more. I'm giving this a 6 because it's solid.
Despite the burden of preferences, what a time to be alive. Oh.
Black Country, I always start videos. I don't know why I always start videos like this. Black Country New Road are seemingly the next band to try and dazzle people in the same vein that like a Kyron Irsay did in 2014 with Ujabasha Zuba, or Black Midi did with their record in 2019. All three of these bands seemingly really love early 90s aggressive experimental rock, but find their own ways to twist it into something new. Kyron Irsay embraced shoegaze and space rock and made them into a harmonious marriage that I still love across their 3-album run. Black Midi on Schlagenheim seemingly embraced a lot more of a no-wave influence on there. And Black Country New Road really likes Slint and other bands from the sort of Midwest era, bands that sort of see weavings of tight grooves and saxophone accompaniment injecting into really bittersweet reflections in the writing. A lot of the writing on this record is reflecting of a relationship, but a lot of intimate details that work really well in a record that deconstructs a relationship in a great way. A great embodiment of that is actually the closer, Opus, which starts with more of a positive reflection before bleeding away into what ultimately was the failure of the project. And a handful of the tracks do that as well, but I feel like the closer, Opus, does it in the best way. But also Sunglasses does something very similar, where but it talks more about it almost feels like the internal monologue of the singer in a great way. And I actually really love their singers very similarly to Black Midi's singers, untethered delivery that gets almost Isaac Brockish at points. I could see Modest Mouse being sort of a relative inspiration for these guys as well, especially with the songwriting. But he also sits in this monotone realm that he just uses his emotions to sort of act as punctuations in a really positive way. He seems like he's reflecting, but almost in the same way that you would when telling a story again, or like in a stand-up set, you know, as it were. But I feel like the band around this singer also do a great job at creating a lot of really good dynamics, whether it's Sunglasses, I'm gonna jump back to this track, is incredible. You know, the way that song builds into this maddening, you know, noise. Again, Opus does a similar fashion, but Sunglasses splits, and there's like a whole second half of the track that again builds to its own sort of really tight groove. Science Fair is another incredibly tightly woven jam. The opener, which is an instrumental track, showcases the band themselves' talents at their core, whether it's a really good drum line, a great riff that plays throughout, or again, some great sax that comes in there as well. This is an incredible record that dazzles in a lot of the great ways that the records that I've already mentioned have as well. And I think that this is a fucking great top tier release from the year so far. I can see why these guys are getting a lot of buzz. I like the detail filled songwriting. Again, I love the POV perspective that the singer gives. You know, I feel like even a track like Science Fair, which sticks much more in the intimate, cutesy reflective phase of their relationship, still is a great track that I haven't really addressed, but I think is another great moment. Some of the tracks on here may seem a little jarring, like track X with its more of a emphasis on grandiosity and string accompaniment, but I feel like that as a whole creates this whole otherworldly dynamic that I think the band, again, utilizes incredibly well. I dig this thing a lot. Definitely one of the better albums I've heard this year so far. I feel like if you enjoy a lot of the stuff that I've talked about before, or if you just like early 90s rock and you want to hear another band from well past that point, channel that in a contemporary sense, listen to this record, because I feel like it's really worth your time. And I dig it. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. And that's going to be my listening log update for February. What did you think about these records? Did you like them? Or did you like my opinions on them? Did you not? Let me know in those comments down below. If you like this video in general, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons. If you want to join the ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, or to help drive the community, it's linked in the description. I'm going to get out of here, though. I have been Vowel Rack. You guys have good days, lots of situations, and I'll see you another day. Also, if you have an album you would like for me to review on this segment, or if you want to see my listening log so far, that's also linked in the description. But yeah, I'll see you another day.